Well, I'm so happy to say that the record should show that it's Bernadette Day here at the Kelly Writers House, October 25th, 2023. And in these videos, we don't usually timestamp them, you know? They're just sort of there forever. But this is an occasion. It's an occasion of celebrating Bernadette, memorializing Bernadette, and gathering Bernadettians, loved ones, families, and poets who are influenced by Bernadette. And we're going to talk about a poem called The Ballad of Theodore. And we have Max Warsh with us. Hi, Max.
Hello.
Thank you for being with us. And Phil Good. Hey, Phil.
Hey, Al.
It's so great to see you. And Marie Warsh is here. And Marie's all excited because Marie's going to get the first question. And Leanne Browne, who is just, I don't know, what you are ubiquitous is what you are.
Thank you.
In the best possible way. And Laynie Browne.
Hello.
Not related to Leanne Browne, except spiritually, I guess. And Brenda Coultas. Hello, Brenda.
Hi.
It's good to see you. And Julie Levitan.
Hello.
Hi, Julie. Tell us just in a sentence or two what your connection to Bernadette has been. Good luck.
I spent the summer of 2018 lurking in Bernadette and Phil's attic with Emily Rush.
That sounds really strange. In the attic.
Yeah, we were up there in the attic. We came down sometimes as well. We spent
Was
a
it
lot of
fun,
time on
Phil,
the porch.
to have them?
Yeah, lots of memories now.
Yeah, you did some stuff.
We did stuff.
And you got things done. Well, you did get things done, right? You were organizing files and
Yeah.
things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I never saw the attic, but it's apparently quite a place.
Yeah, lots of books to deal with.
Marie, the speaker, Bernadette, we presume, is having a vision or a dream of your grandfather, of her father, who died young, and therefore you didn't know him. So, I don't know, why don't we start with you and Max, just to reflect on what it's like to be talking about a poem written by your late mom about your late grandfather as a dream image.
Well, I think when hearing it just now and hearing her speak it was interesting because it reminded me actually of like a children's story, like the way she read it and all of the kind of animal references and like especially the sort of he was all too calm, he was like a businessman, I got him a moose head from the grocery next door. Like it just reminded me of like a children's story or something. And
why is that apt then for Bernadette to do a little more sing-songy writing than she usually does in relation to the presence after absence of a significant person in her life?
I mean, I think she had a really hard time talking about her parents dying in sort of real life in the sense of the conversational life, but then I think she was able to talk about it in poetry.
Yeah.
And I actually feel like I know more sometimes about them, my grandparents, through the poems than I did through her sharing about them. So I think, even there's information in here even that's kind of, the part about him being an electrician who liked Frankenstein, that is information, right, about him that I don't think she ever, I mean, I knew he was an electrician. I didn't know he liked Frankenstein. But so I think they're interesting as records of him. And, but I think I was also thinking, and because you asked the question of what does it feel like to hear this poem now after she's gone, and then thinking also about dreams that I've had of her sort of recently that kind of also have a similar feeling that this has in a sort of way that I don't think I can really speak about here at this moment. But there's something about the sort of appearance of the person all of a sudden in the dream space that also just feels so kind of normal. And I think she suggests that in here as well. Like, you've just been here all along, kind of.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting aspect of the dream.
Max and then Phil, opt in or opt out, totally up to you. But one of the great things about Bernadette's poetry is her ability to make a presence out of an absence. She does it all the time. And sometimes it's just plain old ghosts, as it is here. Not plain old ghosts, but, you know, interesting ghosts. And sometimes it's just some memory of you guys growing up often. So, Max, would you take it from there and add some thoughts, and then Phil, if you want?
Yeah, I mean, I think your mention of ghosts, I immediately go to also like the Poetry Project ghosts that she saw and ghosts in our apartment building that she kind of would talk about, and sort of the regularity, in at least in my mind, of like ghosts kind of coming into her, sort of in front of her in some way, or her encountering ghosts or talking about them. And I guess when I'm reading this, I'm also just thinking about whether that's the same space of the dream space, or whether those two worlds are kind of contiguous with one another, I guess, in terms of like thinking about her sort of vividness of dreaming and how that also comes into play, and like where that line is between like visualizing or encountering a ghost and that actually being a realization of some space of dreaming while being awake. And, you know, thinking she definitely was talking about hypnagogic space, so maybe that's kind of a place that goes to as well. But I don't know. I mean, it's that. I guess that's where I go to in terms of thinking about absence and presence. It's less maybe of that binary and more of just like a continuum of presences that are always here in some way, and then just whether they get conjured or not conjured in a specific moment. And that's kind of what this poem is, maybe.
Phil, you witnessed at first hand so many times Bernadette creating something, and often it was in the liminal space or the subliminal space or the late, not sleeping yet, or early, well, I don't know about early, but the liminal space of waking and creating in the most traditionally inopportune times to create a poem. She's sort of the most important poet of the century, and this one too, in doing that, in insisting that we make poems wherever and whenever.
Right. Well, sometimes that would be out of necessity of taking care of the children, and
including these two on either side of you.
Mm-hmm. But I was thinking about also with her father and her mother, how, like clockwork, her emotions on the anniversary of their deaths were very intense. So it was always heavily on her mind. And I wouldn't say it was almost, she would be, these dreams, if they were magical or like therapy in a way, but then the ability to get it on paper and for everyone else to what would I say, enjoy. But yes, she was always writing in a way that meant, like, she promised me she was going to die at the age of 50. She had to hurry up and get it done. So there was always an intense driving necessity to get these things done.
Leanne, I think I would love to invite the four of you to add what you will, but I want to prompt you on humor. She's so funny, and she finds herself funny, and those are key moments. So maybe you could look at the text and find some humorous moments, or some moments where Bernadette recognized herself as funny.
Well, I think the no kidding part, and also when she said, I'm only fooling, like I wasn't looking down at the text then, and because she said my anxious fate, I'm only fooling, and I thought that was her just interjecting, then I realized it's in the poem. I mean, it's like that's one of her great sayings she'd always say, like, only fooling, you know, like that kind of, just.
And it was already in the poem.
Yeah. Exegetical.
Laynie?
I love how she could be both funny and serious at the same time. So I'm looking at the line, all dressed in a suit as if quite dead, which to me that's really funny, because a ghost isn't dead or alive, or what does it mean to wear a suit when you're a ghost?
But only at first.
Right, and also the idea of wearing a suit, like the constricture of a life that requires one to wear a suit as a form of a kind of death that she rejected that kind of life.
Yeah. Brenda, your thoughts?
Oh, in terms of humor, that's hilarious. Like, I got him a moose head. Moose head. What else do you get a man wearing a giraffe head? A moose head.
Yes.
Love that.
Yes.
Julie?
Yeah.
You can hear, well, we listen to Bernadette's voice, but you can, even without that, as you read this, you can hear Bernadette. Tell us what that means and where you find that.
Yeah, well, I often, like, one of the things that I take the most from the time with Bernadette is the sound of her typing and making herself laugh while she's at it. They're like, ha, and then sometimes like, shit. And I heard that a lot in how she read it of this, in the second stanza, Dead, I often see him once in a while, like, and I appreciate in those moments of humor that she's also saying a lot in this joke of like it's often, but it's once in a while, this collapsing of time that I think runs through a lot of the work about grief, and in what Phil was saying about like the strength of those like temporal markers around grief too, that she almost like invites you to brush over it with that humor, but there's so much in there.
Let's do a round of thinking about loss. Because you invited that with your comment, and we'll start with Max, but we can just just add to it. I mean, I think of there's a double loss here of the father, because when we get to the third from the last stanza, Max, when she says, "I lost him in the dream's sudden regular twist." In other words, she lost him when she was young, then she dreams him, and she loses him in the dream. Maybe the dream shifted. And it's a double loss. When you think of someone who's gone, and then you lose them because you have something else to do, or the phone rings, you lose them again, you keep losing them. And that's not a negative thing for her. It is something to be faced. It's also something to generate poetry as a kind of witness. So anyway, I loaded that up, Max, but thoughts about loss here in this poem, or generally?
I mean, I guess I get more caught up in just the power of this poem to be able to conjure someone who has been lost, and I think maybe that's like what Marie was also saying, just for me, like learning so much more about our sort of family history and connecting with people through the language and through the poems is pretty powerful. And so even if there's an inherent kind of double loss or loss, the poem may be about loss, but I guess I go back to sort of the presence that it kind of gives forth and provides for anyone kind of reading it. And I don't know, for me, that I guess is more what my head focuses on than the loss. But yeah, no, it's definitely about that, but I think the poem is very intentionally engaging with a presence.
Yeah. Phil?
I'm just wondering about the language here, and if Bernadette was imitating anyone else in her studying of who knows what at the time, with like words like, I don't know, and then she's rhyming.
She's rhyming. It's a ballad. He'd walk into our school, daring and dead. I haven't talked to you in centuries. How good to see you, I said. It's almost
That's
Dr.
why it
Seuss.
sounds like a
Twist,
kid's book.
twist,
Yeah.
twist, and
Or the
twist.
ballad, like the form of the ballad kind of generally have some connection to sort of loss, or, I mean.
It's like a song.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little Helen Adam here, isn't there?
But I love
Marie?
this line, a vegetarian, ruminant, silent giraffe, full of his new and current perfect past, like rhyming giraffe and past also.
That's funny. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Leanne?
Yeah, I was thinking about the ballad form too, and how the beginning, it's more regular, like, I saw my father, and then he was there, and dressed in a suit, he asked for a beer. It's very a regular common meter ballad format, and then it still rhymes throughout, comes back to that rhyme, but it expands the line, and how it grows. And it's like, it reminds me of her work with the sonnet, because she disrupts and breaks and remakes the sonnet, but it's still a sonnet, and this is still a ballad, but it's like expanded. And like y'all were saying about that, it's a ballad is traditionally about loss and about stories of death, but it's sometimes they're bright.
Laynie?
I was also thinking about the perfect past, which makes me think of past perfect and a notion of a continuous present, but also how one thing about grieving is that we often return to the age that we were when we lost the person. So that makes sense in thinking of this as kind of a children's story or a nursery rhyme.
And I wanted to sort of switch gears here, but the part where we drove the cars backward,
That's great.
it's like coming back in time, like, you know, like he's alive, they're together, and that, you know, made witty conversations, wore bathing suits and swam together again, but that, the cars backward is so symbolic of returning,
And also
replaying
kind
time.
of father-daughter hijinks almost.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yes.
What animal eats acacia leaves? Is that giraffes?
panda?
I think the giraffes. I think Bernadette had a kind of imprecise reason for just dropping that in there.
She's usually pretty scientific.
Julie, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking a lot. I'm coming back to this last line here, death is not emotional. I'm thinking about what was said earlier about the difficulty of talking about having conversations about remembering lost ones in life and in conversation, but the space that this poem and other poems provide, that I wouldn't say is not emotional, but then it's quite interesting to end on this note of here, death is not emotional in this space where we are doing this coming back, this moving backwards and losing again and coming back to it and losing it again, that somehow that changes the emotional tenor than it would if we were to sit with loss in a non-poetic space.
Perfect. No, that's so great. I mean, my experience reading Bernadette's poems, and because she was a Writers' House Fellow, I read all of them. Is that possible? Not really, but I mean, we read a lot of them. You were in that class.
I was?
And then Bernadette came, and Phil came. And I think I came to realize that this poet is the best at allowing emotion into a poem, but not letting you see it as a conventional way of feeling. That line, the stanza we drove cars backwards, could and the word again at the end of the fourth line, could easily be just plain, I miss you, Dad. But that's not what she's saying. Because there's acacia leaves, and there's witty conversation, which is probably a little ironic. Right? And then wearing bathing suits. Now, wearing bathing suits and swim together again, that is a sweet memory. So she's really, really good at not delivering the easy emotional presence made out of an absence. She's really, really, really great at it. Okay, so we're going to do one more round, and this will be either a final thought on the poem, something you wanted to say but haven't had a chance, or I kind of would invite us to pick a word or a phrase that really summarizes for you. Phil just gave me a face like, a word or a phrase? Really? Do I have to do that? You can do anything. Phil, you can do anything you want. You came such a distance. So anyway, Max, you're kind of like our starter person, but final thought, or you can have a final
Do you
thought.
want to go last?
Maybe.
Let's go. Okay, let's start with Julie and go to Max. Final thought, or a word, or both.
Tricky. I think I like mammal animal. I don't really have any deep reason for that. It just is fun to say and fun to kind of double up on. Obviously, a mammal is an animal, but let's just emphasize that. I think I'm going to leave it at that. I have lots of thoughts. I'm not ready for a final thought.
Yeah, but just add one if you have lots of thoughts. Let's hear one. How you feeling about that?
Right now, I'm this poem and some of the others that we'll be talking about next. I'm in this space, but I'm also like very much on the back porch. This one day where Emily and Bernadette and I were like, I asked her to read some poems, and she wanted to read some from Eating the Colors in a Lineup of Words, and was kind of just talking through a lot of what was coming up for her around these poems, and talking about her parents and synesthesia. And so I'm thinking of that moment a lot.
That's
right now.
beautiful. Thank you. Brenda, final thought and or a word or phrase?
The phrase, no dead man is scared of being dead. So true. As far as we know. It may not be true.
Laynie Browne?
I'm looking at the stanza where we learn that her father she loses him again, like he was an aristocratic woman going from supper to a game of whist instead of what he really was, an electrician who loved Frankenstein. I feel like there is a loss and a retrieval in there too, because there's this novelistic moment, right, where there's the character going to play whist and there's Frankenstein. So there's a retrieval. And in the final line, here death is not he said, here death is not emotional. I'm also reading that as a really soothing message from the other side, where her father is saying, where I am, it's not sad.
That's great.
Yeah, I want to continue with that last line here, death is not emotional, because it's in quotes, and it's very much, I hear her saying, she always said, if you ever hear any language in your dream, write it down. So I'm very sure that's what he actually said to her in the dream. I mean, I feel that, because she's quoting it, and he said it to her, so that happens.
Marie?
Yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts. This all relates to the thing I'm going to talk about later, too, so I might talk about it more later. But I think, yeah, this idea of her finding a space to talk about these things, I think, is kind of key. And the here, death is not emotional is, I think, sums up a lot of that space.
Thank you. Phil?
Yeah, Leanne's right. I mean, she thought these dreams were real, and these are probably exact quotes. That's also funny. She says, I haven't talked to you in centuries. Like, her exaggeration in real life was like that too. Like when she would say, I have a million of those or whatever. Right? So that's her own language, but it was to her it really happened in the dream as well. That's just one thought.
Max?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a lot to talk about, but yeah, I think just in relation to that, I think what you were just saying, Phil, I go back to where the second section where she says, I hadn't seen him alive since 1957, dead, I often see him once in a while. So there's this sort of ongoing kind of encounter that I kind of also go back to in terms of what I was talking to before about just also the regularity of ghosts and the sort of, I think that kind of being an ongoing presence in her world and that kind of being really important. And my middle name is Theodore, so I feel like I connect with this poem on that level as well. But it's great to kind of spend so much time with it right now, so thank you. Yeah.
We're channeling your grandfather. My final thought is to focus again on here. The second line, I saw my father, and then he was here. And of course, here is a metapoetic word along with whatever else it is. That is to say, he's in this poem, he's here. And when you have a double death, such as the passing of the poet who wrote the poem, you have a second here, because Bernadette is here. And then you have, in the second to last stanza, I saw my father Theodore, which is kind of a ballad sum up. We're going to go back, it's almost a chorus. And then he was there. And there is really different. And then the one wonderful funny stuff about vegetarian ruminant silent giraffe. But then, as has been noted, in quotes, here, there's a final here. He asked me for a beer, and he says something about here. And so this is bearing witness to a parent that left her too soon, and it had a huge effect on her and her sisters. People who know the life know. Huge effect. And she's still working through it all these years later when she wrote this poem. And I like to think that we are also working through it right here. There's a lot of heres being multiplied, and in every one of them we have Bernadette Mayer. Thank you all. This was really good.